Imagine, if you will, a wall down the center, and to the left and right of this wall are two sides. We'll label them side A on the left and side B on the right. Now, there's no door that takes you from side A to side B, and the only way to get there is that you have to climb over the wall. And the wall is tall. It has no grips. It is near impossible, but not impossible. And that's why the people who have gone over to side B know something different than the folks who are still standing on side A. A lot of what we're doing over here on side B is trying to pass information back over the wall. We're trying to tell you what we've learned since coming over here. Sometimes we're simply giving you the information. Sometimes we're trying to coach you on how to climb the wall yourself. But we cannot make you go over the wall. You have to choose it. That's the only way it works. And understanding that A-B selection process is paramount. That's even why the United States became culturally different than Europe. In many ways, it was a simple A-B selector. The people who crossed the ocean into the New World self-selected for adventure, risk, hardship, blue-collar trade, uncertainty, frontier life, and opportunity. They climbed a wall. Meanwhile, many of their more traditional people who do not want that life remained behind. Even now, you can see this pattern in discussions like the mythic and the Epimetheus and Promethean divide. But really, underneath all of it is this simple A-B selector and the wall itself. And that wall is a liminal space. That's what I'm trying to get you to understand. The entire point of this discussion is understanding the liminal space. For my purposes, I have found the Germanic pantheon to be one of the most accurate ways of describing this world and this process. I'm using mythological terminology to describe a very real human experience. The process of going from untested to tested, from uninitiated to initiated, from one side of the wall to the other. And at least on this channel, I'm trying to do two things at the same time. First, I'm trying to provide some things I've learned over here on Side B, as I've mentioned. And second, I'm still trying to challenge some of you over there on Side A to make decisions to climb the wall and come join us. Become tested, become initiated. Because we used to have rites of passage that helped men cross this boundary in a controlled and meaningful way. Modern society has largely abandoned those mechanisms, but the psychological process itself never disappeared. Which means it's really important that we understand the mechanics behind all of this. I think what we are really circling around here is a distinction between initiation and avoidance. Not good men versus bad men, not violent men versus peaceful men, but initiated men versus uninitiated men. And, importantly, not everyone on Side A is the same. Some men on Side A know there's a mountain in front of them. They may be afraid of it, but they respect it. They know adulthood, responsibility, sacrifice, danger, leadership, fatherhood, combat, risk, hierarchy, and burden are all real things. They may not be there yet, but they are moving toward it. Those men usually respond well to paternal guidance because they can already feel the pull of Side B. The second group senses that same mountain, but spends all of its energy avoiding the climb. They distract themselves, rationalize, stay perpetual adolescents. They know the line exists, but they resent the existence of the line because crossing it requires transformation. And I think that's where a lot of modern nihilism and irony culture comes from. It's avoidance behavior. But the third group is the most important for this discussion because they've been culturally conditioned to deny the existence of the line entirely. To them, there's no initiation. There is no masculine burden. There is no deeper responsibility tied to strength. There is no transformation through ordeal. There is no difference between tested and untested men. So, when they encounter men speaking from side B, they don't interpret it as experience. They interpret it as mythology. That's the key insight. A veteran talking about violence, duty, sacrifice, or hierarchy sounds dangerous to them because they literally lack the framework to understand why those things exist in the first place. They hear discussions of force and assume cruelty. They hear hierarchy and assume oppression. They hear masculine initiation and assume toxicity. Not because they are evil, but because they've been taught a model of humanity where side B is either unnecessary or immoral. The point is that there is a recognizable altered state that emerges under intensity, chaos, risk, brotherhood, adrenaline, surrender to momentum, and proximity to danger. Men who have experienced it immediately recognize it. Men who haven't often cannot. That's why operators, athletes, fighters, musicians, firefighters, roughnecks, climbers, martial artists, and even men in dangerous trades often understand one another instinctively, despite wildly different politics or backgrounds. They've crossed versions of the same threshold. And I think the mistake modern culture makes is assuming that because the threshold is dangerous, it should not exist. But historically, almost every civilization understood the opposite. Without crossing some threshold, boys do not become men. And if no formal initiation exists, men will eventually seek uncontrolled ones, like gangs, crime, reckless behavior, self-destruction, chaotic violence, addiction, or even ideological extremism. Because the hunger for transformation does not disappear simply because society refuses to name it. And I think it's important to understand that side B is not about superior humans. That's not the point. The point is that side B carries responsibilities and burdens that side A often does not yet understand. Because eventually, whether people like it or not, they are going to encounter reality, burden, danger, responsibility, loss, hierarchy, sacrifice, and fear. And when they do, the things they mocked may suddenly make sense. And once you finally climb over the wall from side A to side B, you start to realize the true scale of it all. Because at first, when you're standing on side A, the wall feels personal. It feels like your challenge, your obstacle, your initiation. But once you get over to side B, you realize the wall was never just about you. The wall is enormous. It stretches farther than you can see. And eventually you realize something else. That wall is a perimeter. We built it around side A. Or more accurately, the men on side B built it around side A. And it was always our responsibility to stand outside the wall and keep the predators, the chaos, and the darkness away from the people living safely inside. That's the part boys don't often understand. They grow up inside. The people growing up inside side A grow up innocent, so to speak. And innocence belongs to women and children. And no man can be truly innocent. We've talked about this before. Because once you step across the line into side B, your innocence is now gone. Innocence exists only on side A. That's part of the initiation. Innocence is for boys. You're a man now. And once you're standing out there on side B, you finally understand what the wall actually is. The wall is not there to imprison the people inside. The wall is there to protect them. Because outside the wall is wilderness. Outside the wall is danger. It's dark out there. You can go anywhere you want for as far as you want. There are no walls, no limits, no guarantees, no safety rails, and at first, that freedom can feel exhilarating. But eventually you realize why the perimeter exists. Because there are things in the wilderness that would absolutely come pouring through that wall if nobody stood there to stop them. And that's the part a lot of modern people have forgotten. The wall only works if men are willing to stand outside of it, cold, wet, tired, afraid, bleeding, alone sometimes. Guarding people who often don't understand what's being kept away from them. That's the burden of Side B. And the strange thing is, once you understand this, you also begin to understand why some people inside Side A resent the men standing on the wall. Because if you've spent your whole life protected by the perimeter, eventually you can begin to mistake the perimeter for oppression instead of protection. You start believing the wilderness isn't dangerous. You start believing the predators aren't real. You start believing the wall itself is unnecessary. Until the wall breaks. And then suddenly everyone remembers why it was there in the first place. That liminal space, that crossing from Side A to Side B, is the process of realizing this responsibility. It's the process of understanding that civilization is not self-sustaining. Somebody has to stand guard. Somebody always has to stand guard. Now, once we understand Side A, Side B, and the wall between them, the next question becomes obvious. Why would a man choose to cross the wall in the first place? And, if we're being honest, in most cases they historically didn't choose it on their own. Their parents made them cross. Because children do not naturally choose hardship. They choose comfort, safety, ease, warmth, and familiarity. That's normal. That's human. Which means initiation was something placed upon young men by fathers, tribes, communities, rites, expectations, and necessity. That transition happened because it had to happen. And historically, one of the biggest motivating factors was survival itself. There was a time when food, resources, security, and opportunity flowed first into Side B, and from Side B, they were handed over into Side A. The men standing outside the wall brought resources back to the people protected inside that perimeter. Which meant, if a young man wanted access to resources, status, responsibility, purpose, land, respect, or even the ability to start a family, he had to climb the wall and join the men on Side B. That was simply how life worked. But over time, something changed. The incoming resources stopped flowing primarily into Side B and began flowing almost entirely into Side A instead. And now you have generations of young men growing up inside of Side A whose material needs are, at least superficially, already being met. Food, entertainment, comfort, distraction, convenience, artificial status, digital validation. And because those needs appear to be met, many of these young men no longer see a reason to climb the wall at all. But what often goes unquestioned is this: who is actually providing those resources? Are they being provided by the men of your own community standing guard outside the wall? Or are they being provided by distant systems, institutions, bureaucracy, abstractions, or outsiders that have replaced the traditional relationship between Side A and Side B? Because that question matters. And this is what makes the whole discussion confusing for modern people. You can now have fully grown men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who have never truly crossed the wall. They may be materially successful. They may be wealthy. They may appear sophisticated, educated, influential, or socially validated. But they are still psychologically standing on side A. And for the young men looking at the wall, this creates confusion. Because they look over and think, well, if that man has money, comfort, status, and success without ever crossing over to side B, then why should I climb the wall at all? And that, in many cases, is the challenge we're facing now. Historically, mythology, religion, tribal structure, initiation rites, and cultural expectations all work together to push young men toward side B. Sometimes through honor, sometimes through duty, sometimes through fear, sometimes through necessity. But the movement happened. Now, many of those same mechanisms have been weakened or inverted. Because if a civilization can redirect enough resources into side A, it can keep large portions of the population psychologically suspended in a prolonged state of adolescence. And the people most resistant to discussions like this are often the ones most invested in pretending the wall either does not exist or does not need to be crossed. Not the young men preparing themselves to climb it, not the men already standing guard outside of it, but the people trying to convince everyone that side A is sufficient forever. That comfort is adulthood, that consumption is meaning, that safety is maturity, that protection and initiation are always unnecessary. But the wall still exists, whether people acknowledge it or not. And eventually, reality forces the question onto every civilization. Who is still willing to climb it? Now, I may be dating myself here, but there's an old music video from the 1980s by Aha for the song Take On Me. And if you ignore the actual motivation of the song itself and just watch the video symbolically, it's actually an excellent representation of this exact concept. Because the whole video is about crossing through a liminal space from one world into another. And even in the video, it's not an easy transition. I wouldn't necessarily call it traumatic, but it's obviously difficult and disorienting for the young man trying to move from point A to point B. He has to force himself through this threshold between worlds, and there's resistance the entire time. And once he crosses through, the world changes. He goes from this black and white, flat, constrained understanding of reality into something colorful, vibrant, living, and fully dimensional. And I think that symbolism matters more than people realize. Because one of the things I'm constantly trying to communicate on this channel is the reality of the liminal space itself. That wall, the threshold, that boundary between one state of being and another, the altered state, between childhood and adulthood, between innocence and responsibility, between safety and danger, between the untested and the tested, between comfort and initiation, and even between life and death itself. That threshold exists, and if you start looking for it, you begin seeing it everywhere. You see it in mythology, religion, ancient rites of passage. You see it in war, marriage, fatherhood, sacrifice. You see it in grief. You see it in near-death experiences. You see it in great suffering. You even see it reflected in modern art and music, often without the creators themselves fully understanding why they're drawn to the imagery. Because human beings have always understood at some level that transformation requires crossing a boundary. And the reason that liminal space matters so much is because you do not come back from it the same person you were before. Something changes. Something dies. Something matures. Something awakens. And once you begin recognizing that process, you start realizing just how much of human civilization, mythology, religion, storytelling, and even personal growth has always revolved around helping people cross those thresholds. And I think there's another point here that really needs to be stated directly. The process of boys crossing the boundary into manhood is not some optional luxury cultural belief. It is not a hobby. It is not aesthetic. It is not some old-fashioned tradition that civilizations casually practiced before they had spare time and extra resources. It is a survival mechanism. And I think one of the greatest mistakes of the modern West is that many of the good habits, structures, expectations, and cultural mechanisms that once sustained civilization have slowly been reframed as luxuries instead of necessities. Strong families became a luxury. Community became a luxury. Rites of passage became a luxury. Masculine initiation, tradition, even having children became treated like a luxury. And once people began viewing essential cultural mechanisms as luxuries, they became the very first thing sacrificed the moment economic pressure appears. And that's all it really takes, isn't it? Convince a population that the things keeping them healthy, stable, disciplined, bonded, and self-sustaining are merely optional comforts instead of survival mechanisms, and then increase the economic pressure enough that people voluntarily abandon those things themselves. No shots fired. And the tragic part is that from the perspective of the individual making those decisions, many of them even seem rational in the short term. Working longer hours instead of raising your children, avoiding hardship to preserve comfort, delaying adulthood indefinitely, avoiding family formation, avoiding responsibility, avoiding initiation. All of it can be rationalized individually. But civilizations are not measured only by short-term individual comfort. They are measured by whether they can reproduce capable, responsible, initiated adults across generations. And once a society loses those mechanisms that reliably transform boys into men, eventually the perimeter weakens, because the walls do not defend themselves. Once you understand this dynamic, you can begin using it as a lens to examine other problems in society. Take the modern dating crisis between young men and women. How many times have you heard people say, girls only go for the bad boys? But I do think that framing misses what's really happening, because most of the time women are not responding to badness itself. What they're responding to is that the man has crossed the wall. He's initiated. He has agency. He has presence. He has conviction. He acts. He moves. He decides. He carries himself differently because psychologically he is no longer standing inside A. Now, people often place a moral judgment on the particular manner in which a man was initiated, and sometimes that criticism is completely fair. Some men are initiated through destructive environments, violence, criminality, gangs, trauma, recklessness, or chaos. It's true. But the important thing to understand is that initiation itself is not the immoral part. And I can tell you with certainty that men can choose to live honorable, disciplined, constructive lives and still produce the same sense of agency, gravitas, confidence, capability, and grounded masculinity that people instinctively respond to. Because If this were purely about bad behavior, then highly disciplined men would not produce the same reaction, but they do. Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Airborne Rangers generally do not struggle attracting women in much the same way that so-called bad boys often do not struggle attracting women. And through this lens, what you are starting to realize is that the common denominator is not morality or immorality. It's agency. It's action. It is willpower applied in the real world. Did the man cross the wall? Did he undergo transformation? Did he become capable? Did he embrace responsibility, risk, challenge, and consequence? Did he develop confidence through contact with reality? That is what people are responding to. And I think modern society has a habit of moralizing this process in a very confused way. We often speak as though masculine initiation itself is toxic, as though hardship itself is dangerous, as though testing boys and expecting transformation is somehow oppressive or unhealthy. But what's actually dangerous is leaving the large numbers of young men permanently uninitiated. Because initiation is going to happen one way or another. The only real question is whether it happens through constructive structures, discipline, brotherhood, responsibility, service, ordeal, achievement, purpose, and controlled rites of passage, or whether it happens chaotically through crime, addiction, resentment, nihilism, recklessness, violence, and social collapse. That's the real choice societies are making. Not whether initiation exists, but whether civilized people will take responsibility for guiding it. And through this lens, it becomes a little easier to understand why the ideological capture of many of our academies, both at the public school and collegiate level, have been so damaging to the West. Because whether intentionally or unintentionally, many of these institutions increasingly began treating masculine initiation itself as something suspicious, dangerous, oppressive, or psychologically unhealthy. Competition became suspect, hardship became suspect, male bonding became suspect, hierarchy, discipline, even the idea of transforming boys into men became culturally uncomfortable. And once that happened, one of the most important civilizational functions those institutions once helped facilitate began collapsing. Because education is not merely about transferring technical information. Civilizations also rely on institutions to socialize, discipline, challenge, pressure, mature, and initiate young people into adult responsibility. And when a society strips its academies of the ability to participate in that process, eventually it begins producing technically trained adults who are psychologically uninitiated. People with credentials but no resilience, information but no responsibility, opinions but no discipline, entitlement without burden, comfort without sacrifice. Which means the civilization slowly loses one of its primary mechanisms for transforming boys into capable men. And once that mechanism collapses at scale, the long-term effects begin appearing everywhere. Leadership crises, social fragmentation, lack of purpose, male disengagement, declining family formation, institutional distrust, and the inability of large numbers of men to shoulder responsibility during periods of instability. Because whether modern society acknowledges it or not, initiation is not optional for a civilization that intends to survive. So, what does a solution actually look like? Well, whatever the solution is, it's going to have to be collective. Because this is not an individual problem anymore. It is a civilizational problem, which means there is a communal responsibility involved in solving it. And one of the first things we have to understand is that masculinity itself cannot truly be learned through abstraction alone. You cannot learn it purely from books. You cannot learn it purely online. You cannot learn it exclusively through podcasts, motivational clips, or social media content. Those things can point you in the right direction, but masculinity itself is ultimately learned through direct male-to-male contact, through osmosis, through mentorship, through hierarchy, through challenge, through brotherhood, shared hardship, through responsibility, through witnessing other men carry burdens properly. That's how boys have always learned how to become men. And I know that's probably a difficult truth for a lot of people to hear, especially in a culture built increasingly around digital substitutes and monetized self-help industries. At some point, this process has to happen in person, which means we need to begin solving this problem from the understanding that initiation is a collective responsibility, and collective responsibilities cost resources. That's another thing modern people struggle with, because we increasingly evaluate everything through the lens of individual profit and personal convenience. But not everything important makes money. The United States Marine Corps does not exist because it generates profit. It exists because societies sometimes require institutions that cost resources in order to preserve larger collective interests. And initiation functions similarly. It requires time. It requires sacrifice. It requires mentorship. It requires land, spaces, effort, attention, patience, structure, and resources. And if we're being serious about rebuilding capable men, then eventually groups of men are going to have to collectively decide that this process matters enough to invest in it even when it costs something. Because what it produces on the other side is exactly what we say we want. Capable men, disciplined men, high agency men, responsible fathers, protectors, leaders, builders, brothers, initiated adults capable of carrying civilizational burdens. Now, how exactly we accomplish that? Well, I have 1,000 ideas. And honestly, a lot of that is the kind of thing better discussed directly, in person, among men actually trying to solve the problem together instead of endlessly theorizing online. But fundamentally, I think the first step is simply admitting that young men need guidance, structure, mentorship, initiation, challenge, and brotherhood. And I don't mean that in some patronizing or charitable sense. I'm not talking about treating them like helpless victims. I'm talking about recognizing that civilizations historically invested enormous effort into transforming boys into men because they understood the stakes involved if they failed to do so. So where do we start? We start with the young men who already know they need help, the ones already looking up at the wall, the ones already preparing themselves to climb. Then, eventually, we work with the ones avoiding the climb but who can still be reached. But realistically, we cannot spend all of our energy trying to convince people who fundamentally reject the idea that adulthood requires transformation, responsibility, sacrifice, or initiation at all. At some point, resources have to go toward the people willing to act. And ultimately, what this means is that men are going to have to come together collectively and begin passing along the skills, expectations, values, disciplines, structures, and experiences required to help as many young men as possible cross from side A to side B. And that process is not going to be free. Not financially, not emotionally, not socially, not personally. It will require sacrifice, which means eventually we all have to ask ourselves a very serious question. What are we actually willing to do? And in furtherance of this goal, I also need to be very clear about something else. This is not ultimately going to happen online. And honestly, the reasons for that are almost entirely practical and utilitarian. The best example I can give you is this. The planning and coordination for the Normandy landings during D-Day was conducted entirely with paper, pens, maps, face-to-face discussions, couriers, radios, and typewriters. Not a single digital component existed anywhere inside that planning process. And yet, it remains one of the most sophisticated logistical and organizational operations in human history. Now, imagine trying to coordinate something of that scale on modern social media platforms. It would be impossible, not because the people involved lack intelligence, but because the environment itself is structurally hostile to serious coordination, trust building, privacy, long-term thinking, and disciplined communication. Modern social media is optimized for outrage, distraction, status games, ideological infighting, surveillance, dopamine loops, vanity metrics, and public performance. It is not optimized for building real-world brotherhood, trust, responsibility, or long-term civilizational structures. And frankly, if you were trying to organize anything meaningful in the real world, you also would not want every adversarial institution, hostile actor, opportunist, bad faith participant, or random stranger instantly observing every internal discussion in real time. We are not talking about secret conspiracies, classified operations, or hidden cabals. We're not starting an underground criminal network. This does not require some movie-style intelligence apparatus, a SCIF, or top-secret clearances. What it requires is something much simpler and much older. Men willing to meet face to face. Men willing to sit around a fire. Men willing to build trust slowly. Men willing to look one another in the eye. Men willing to share responsibility in the real world instead of performing for audiences online. And honestly, men who have already crossed the wall into side B generally understand this instinctively. Those are the men we actually need to be speaking with directly. Now, this doesn't mean the online world has no purpose, it does. That's where many of the young men on side A still are. That's where outreach happens. That's where ideas spread. That's where some people first begin looking toward the wall at all. But if we are serious about having side B conversations, then eventually those conversations have to move into the real world. Because civilization itself exists in the real world. Brotherhood exists in the real world. Responsibility, trust, initiation exists in the real world. And I think one of the mistakes modern people make is assuming everything must happen immediately. Everything must scale instantly. Everything must go viral. Everything must become massive overnight. But we are talking about civilizational and cultural problems. And civilizations are not rebuilt in 30-day marketing cycles. I don't need 1,000 tasks completed by the end of the month. I would rather see 10 meaningful tasks completed every year for the next 100 years. Because that is how civilizations were actually built in the first place. Slowly, deliberately, through continuity, through inheritance, through generations of men carrying burdens forward one step at a time. And I think that's the mentality we need to recover if we're serious about solutions. Until next time.